counties, and if it is, whether it is a special or an ordinary bill. The bill provides for a framework through which both houses of parliament can resolve issues on whether a bill is a bill concerning counties, and if it is, whether it is a special or an ordinary bill. Presently, there is no legal framework on how the speakers of both houses of parliament are to enforce concurrence on all the bills presented to both houses of parliament. The bill therefore provides for the procedure for concurrence on all bills tabled in either house of parliament, the dispute resolution on concurrence, and the consequences of non-concurrence on a bill. The bill provides for nomination of a joint committee by the speakers of both houses of parliament to resolve any dispute on concurrence on a bill. The resolution of a joint committee shall bind the speakers of both houses of parliament. Further, the bill provides that for a bill to be published in the Gazette, the bill has to be accompanied by a certificate of concurrence from the speakers of both houses of parliament. The determination of the nature of bills procedure bill also provides for a referral of any ordinary bill concerning counties after the bill has passed by one house and transmitted to the other house to a mediation committee established under Article 113 of the Constitution if a session elapses from the date of the reception of the bill by the other house without the bill being passed by it. The bill also provides for referral of a bill to the Supreme Court for advisory opinion in instances where the two speakers fail to concur on whether a bill is a bill concerning counties, and if it is, whether it is a special or ordinary bill. The bill further provides that a bill taken for presidential assent has to be accompanied by a certificate of concurrence from speakers of both houses of parliament. The bill does not limit any fundamental rights or freedoms, and it is expected to provide a framework for determining the bills that concern counties and therefore ensure that devolution and powers and functions of counties are protected during the lawmaking process in parliament. The bill is therefore a bill concerning county governments in terms of Article 110 subsection 1A of the Constitution. This particular bill has been authored by Senators Mutula Kilonzo Jr. of Makueni County and Senator Johnson Sakaja Arthur of Nairobi County. Also in the order of business this afternoon is the debate for the second reading of the Copyright Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 33 of 2017. This debate had already begun. It was interrupted yesterday, Tuesday 13th November 2018, and thereafter there will be a division. The County Outdoor Advertising Control Bill, which is also active before the Senate, is also scheduled for debate for the second reading, and thereafter the members will be moving to the Committee of the Whole House to consider some amendments to three bills, among them the Retirement Benefits, Deputy President and Designated State Officers Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 2 of 2018, and the County Government Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 13 of 2018, and the Care and Protection of Older Members of Society Bill, Senate Bills number 17 of 2018. The Land Value Index Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2018 is also active before the Senate. The debate on this particular bill had already begun before it was interrupted yesterday, Tuesday 13th November 2018. As well, there are a number of bills which have been lined up for debate for second reading. The debate for the second reading is yet to commence, and these bills include the Public-Private Partnerships Amendment Bill, the County Statutory Instruments Amendment Bill, that's a Senate bill, the Treaty Making and Ratification Amendment Bill, another Senate bill, number 23 of 2018, the Statutory Instruments Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 24 of 2018, the County Law Compliance and Enforcement Bill, Senate Bills number 25 of 2018, and finally the County Early Childhood Education Bill, Senate Bills number 26 of 2018. These particular bills will be debated before the Senate if the senators are able to dispense off the business that precede them. If you're just joining us, these are live pictures from the Senate chambers, and there is some activity at the door. And on your screen is the mace, followed by the Speaker of the Senate, Senator Kenneth Makelo Lusaka. This broadcast is brought to you by TBU KBC.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we beseech you to behold with your abundant favor and blessings us, your servants whom you have been pleased to call to leadership positions in this republic. We seek guidance to treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberations in so just and faithful a manner as to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of our country and of those whose interests you have committed to our church. Amen.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair.
Honorable Senators, I would like to acknowledge the presence in the Speaker's Gallery this afternoon of visiting staff from the county assemblies of Taita Taveta and Meru. I request the two officers to stand when called out so they may be acknowledged in the Senate tradition. They are Ms. Milka Riga, Principal Research Officer, Taita Taveta County Assembly, Mr. Kenkos Mutuma, Research Officer, Meru County Assembly. In our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. I thank you. Order, members. Freeze. Okay. Honorable Senators, I wish to inform you that the Office of the Speaker of the Senate has organized a meeting between the Senate and the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA, to deliberate on public-private sector's engagement, especially on legislative matters and its effect on the economy. KEPSA is the apex body of the private sector in Kenya, with a membership drawn from various sectors of the economy. KEPSA advocates on behalf of the private sector in respect of high-level national cross-cutting issues. So it also coordinates the private sector's engagement on public-private sector dialogue with the various arms of government, with the overreaching goal of creating an environment conducive to business, which makes Kenya a globally competitive investment destination. Honorable Senators, during the 11th Parliament, KEPSA established a relationship with the Senate and held a number of forums that provided an engagement platform for the Senate and the private sector on matters regarding devolution, ease of doing business in the counties, and ensuring that the legislative environment was supportive of the socio-economic growth across Kenya. Such forums included the Liaison Committee, KEPSA retreat held on September 2014, and Senate KEPSA roundtable meeting held in July 2016. Honorable Senators, this year's engagement will be a continuation of our partnership with KEPSA, and the first one in the life of the 12th Parliament. The theme for the 2018 second round table retreat with KEPSA is reimagining Kenya's political economy. The meeting will focus on the following broad objectives. 1, to outline recommendations and strategy for the conclusion of list of policies, laws, and regulations in the areas of revenue generation, debt management, effective taxation, quality of policy and governance, which will facilitate a conducive business environment, jobs, wealth creation, and inclusive prosperity. 2, to engage on key private sector recommendations on the legislative agenda and to increase coordination between the legislature and the private sector on legislative agenda needed to drive the Big Four development agenda and to unlock private sector investment in the same. And 3, enhance engagement between the Senate and the private sector through collaboration with standing committees. Honorable Senators, the retreat is scheduled to take place on 22nd to 24th November 2018 at the Leisure Lodge, Diani, Kwale County. Senators are scheduled to depart from Diani on the evening of Thursday, 22nd November 2018 and return to Nairobi on Saturday, 24th November 2018. I am therefore inviting all of you to plan to attend the important forum. You are requested to forward your preferred travel times to the Office of the Clerk, Senate, for planning and logistical purposes. I thank you. Next order.
Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions.
Chair, Education Committee. You have a petition, eh?
This is not okay. Okay. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to lay the following petition report on the table of the Senate today, Wednesday, 14th November 2018. Report of the Standing Committee of Education and the Standing Committee on National Security, Defense and Foreign Relations on the petition concerning the plight of non-local teachers working in Mandera County. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next order.
Order number 5, papers.
The chair is already there. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the Senate today, Wednesday, the 14th November, 2018. Report of the Sessional Committee on Public Accounts and Investments on the inquiry into the financial operations of the Kiambu, Busia, Kwale, Tana River, Trans Nzoia, Nyandarua, Migori, Kisumu, Samburu, Kericho, Bomet, Bungoma, Garissa, Isiolo, Kitui, Lamu, Makueni, Mandera, Marsabit, Meru, Mombasa, Nyamira, Taita Taveta, Uasin Gishu, Vihiga, and Wajir County Executives for the financial year 2013-2014, beginning 1st July 2013 to 30th of June 2014. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, I also beg to lay the following papers on the table of the Senate today, Wednesday, the 14th of November, 2018. Report of the Sessional Committee on Public Accounts and Investments on fiduciary risks regarding issues raised by the Auditor General on public financial management by county governments for the financial years 2013-2014 to 2015-2016. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the Senate today, Wednesday, 14th November 2018. Report of the Auditor General on the financial statements of the county government of Tharaka and Nithi for the year ended 30th June 2017. I think.
Next order. What's your point of order, Leader of Minority?
Speaker, I was anticipating that there would be a paper laid, or rather the report of the Powers and Privileges Committee report on the issue of Raraka land, that it should have been laid today. I'm just saying this because, Mr. Speaker, you have no locus standi to table. So can we know the mechanism? Because I think it's getting out of hand.
Thank you, Leader of Minority. I think the Power and Privileges Committee did meet this afternoon, adopted the paper with some adjustments, and I think they are finalizing, and it should be tabled tomorrow by one of the committee members because the Speaker is the chair. Next order. Oh, okay, yes, Senator.
Mr. Speaker, without belaboring this issue, can I invite you myself to your chambers in respect of the debate then on the substantive motion, because I think notice had already been given. And I'm saying this because the members of the committee are likely to be in Kampala the whole week, next week. Yeah, so that if it is not discussed tomorrow, then there will be further delay. So probably the appropriate thing for me to do is to approach you in your chambers and the clerk to determine when that motion can be debated.
Leader of Minority, approach the chair. Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion.
Mr. Speaker, sir, with your indulgence, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that this House adopts the report of the Sessional Committee on Public Accounts and Investments on the inquiry into the financial operations of Kiambu, Busia, Kwale, Tana River, Trans Nzoia, Nyandarua, Migori, Kisumu, Samburu, Kericho, Bomet, Bungoma, Garissa, Isiolo, Kitui, Lamu, Makueni, Mandera, Marsabit, Meru, Mombasa, Nyamira, Taita Taveta, Uasin Gishu, Vihiga, and Wajir County Executive for the financial year 2013-2014, beginning on 1st July 2013 to 30th of June 2014. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Musuruve. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, Senator, you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once again, with your indulgence, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that this House adopts the report of the Sessional Committee on Public Accounts and Investments on fiduciary risks regarding issues raised by the Auditor General on public financial management by county governments for financial years from 2013-2014 to 2015-2016. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Malala is not there. So that stands deferred. Senator Musuruve, deferred. Next order.
Order number 7, statements.
Senator Mwaruma. Seemingly, Senator Mwaruma is not aware. Senator George Haniri. You have to take your seat. I'll call you. Senator Haniri.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for this opportunity. Pursuant to Standing Order 47-1, I rise to make a statement on an issue of general topical concern regarding the alarming high rates of teenage pregnancies. Mr. Speaker, since the start of the primary and secondary school national exams this year, many cases of pregnant school girls have been reported. Several girls, numbering hundreds, missed exams due to pregnancy. Some missed exams because they had just given birth and were at home taking care of their newborn babies. Some gave birth while sitting for the exams, and yet others, Mr. Speaker, are expectant even as they carry on with the exams. Mr. Speaker, statistics by the United Nations Population Fund, UNFP, indicate that between June 2016 and July 2017, 378,397 adolescents in Kenya aged between 10 and 19 got pregnant. 28,932 were of ages 10 to 14. Mr. Speaker, this is very disturbing. And 349,465 were aged between 15 and 19 years. Organizations working on children issues say the number could be higher than the reported cases. This year alone, Mr. Speaker, in Kilifi County, there has been close to 14,000 teenage pregnancies, with 290 of them being children of 10 to 14 years. Mr. Speaker, last year in Kisumu County, 13,894 teenage girls got pregnant. One of our local dailies featured very shocking teen pregnancy statistics. Narok County had the highest rate of teen pregnancy of 40%. That is the good county of my friend Ledama here. Kitui County, Kitui County, which announced 110 pregnant candidates sitting for their Form 4 exams, was number 30 on the list at 14%. Mr. Speaker, these statistics are shocking. Mr. Speaker, we are talking about children here. In Kenya, a 10 to 14-year-old girl is in standard 5 to maybe standard 8. These are children whose physical bodies are not mature enough to bring life into this world and nurture it. Baby. Mr. Speaker, sir, an unplanned pregnancy changes the trajectory of a girl's life with long-lasting physical, socioeconomic, and psychological ramifications. It is an interruption of life that can never be undone. Natural instincts will dictate that a mother puts her children first before anything else. This causes most of these girls to neglect their studies and focus on bringing up their babies. Most of the girls drop out of school after being impregnated, and others are forced into early marriages. This compromises education attainment and the ability to secure decent economic opportunities. Mr. Speaker, if the young people who should be going to school and helping in the growth of our economy are taking care of children, then we may not achieve our development goals as a country. Mr. Speaker, sir, what exactly is causing these increased numbers of teenage pregnancy? Is it peer pressure, molestation, or lack of sexual awareness? In some places, the biggest driver is poverty. The girls are forced to exchange their bodies for little money to enable them buy personal effects. And yet in other cases, Mr. Speaker, touts and motorcycle riders, commonly known as border operators, are the cause of this predicament. Night funeral discos, child marriages, rape, and peer influence are other causes. A number of girls who have given birth in their teenage years confessed that they were either lured by their teachers or classmates. Data from the TSC shows that in 2015, the year 2015, 126 teachers were fired for various vices, some of which included sexual offenses. Mr. Speaker, while the government emphasizes on the back-to-school integration after birth, there is more that needs to be done. There's more that needs to be done to ensure teenage mothers are actually learning. Systems should be put in place that will ensure such young people get someone, such as their parents or hired help, to take care of their children while they go back to school, if they are to concentrate in class. Organizations or facilities can be put in place to help the girls who have been disowned by families or have no one to turn to for help. The pressure to mature and transition from a child to a mother is extremely stressful for teenagers, especially because they still need parenting themselves. Therefore, being in a position where they have to take up responsibilities which their minds are not ready for can be very depressing for them. Guidance and counseling sessions for the teen mothers can be introduced as out-of-school activities to help them cope with their situations. I remember, Mr. Speaker, growing up in the society where every child was raised by members of the society. Strangers could discipline you and report you to your parents when they found you misbehaving. But times, Mr. Speaker, are different now. With the technology, more freedoms and rights for children, we all mind our own business. Despite this, I believe it is time we strongly spoke up about sex education at all levels of life, from within the family, structures, schools, and even places of worship. We all need to agree on what age is appropriate to start having discussions about sex with our children. We also need to agree on the information that is given out to them. In this day and age, with technology easily accessible, internet and media, parents, guardians, and the community at large need to pay attention on how our children are using these amenities. The current curriculum needs to be revised so that sexual and reproduction studies are strongly yet candidly addressed. Emphasis should be put on empowering teenagers to value their bodies so that they can understand how engaging in early sex can change their lives. Parliament may also consider passing laws that will further promote reproductive health, even in teenage girls. Mr. Speaker, it is also time we acknowledge that we have many cases of defilement leading to pregnancies. When the girl in question is a minor, the case needs to be thoroughly investigated and the perpetrators involved be prosecuted. There are cases where the parents start negotiating with the person responsible for the pregnancy. They request for some form of compensation or dowry and even encourage the child to get into early marriage with the person involved. Such cases need to be punished according to the law. These young girls need to be taught how to identify situations where they could be getting sexually molested and what actions to take when such situations occur, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, lastly, now that these cases are in the limelight, authorities are calling for multidisciplinary approach to end the vice. It is my hope that this time around, adequate measures to address the vice shall be implemented. Let us all take our place to bring up a better informed, equipped, and empowered generation that makes the right decisions and choices. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you.
Senator Beatrice Kwamboka, since you had a similar statement, I'll give you the first priority to contribute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think it will not sound well before I give my gratitude note, since I've been given another role in this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank my party leader, the People's President, His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga, for nominating me to this House. With the same breath, I would like to thank my coalition, the NASA coalition, for trusting me with this great responsibility. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I'm humbled to serve as the Deputy Whip for the minority in the Senate of our beloved nation. Mr. Speaker, I want to promise that I will remain objective in the line of duty to ensure that the business of this House is successful for the remainder of the term. I'm looking forward to work with all the members who gave me encouragement and congratulated me for this new position. I will work well to steer the Senate towards a successful session. Back to the rider statement, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, this is a very pertinent issue about the early pregnancy for these young girls of ours. Mr. Speaker, if you see the rate of how our girls are being impregnated and they go to school while they are pregnant, the parents are not even communicating to the relevant authorities. It is wrong. Something has to be done, Mr. Speaker. I find it very difficult to see a parent staying with a girl or a daughter for good 9 months until the time of sitting for examination. That's the time that they are coming out to report such matters. Something has to be done. The law has to be enforced. Mr. Speaker, the factors that are bringing that issue of early pregnancy, Mr. Speaker, some of them are caused by separation of the families, ignorance, social media, Mr. Speaker. And in the social media, Mr. Speaker, I would like to point on another program which comes on the television on Fridays, 10 out of 10. Something has to be done about it. Because at the time they bring those programs of them, it's not nice because some of it are pornography. Like last week, I observed that program on the TV. It was not good. The law must be enforced for such programs. Something has to be done. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Mr. Speaker, yes. 10 over 10. Yes. Mr. Speaker, something has to be done with the counties. The county has a mandate to set programs for community outreach programs to educate the people, the community, on how to overcome this problem of early pregnancy. And we must have even sex education introduced to the schools, at least for those children of us to have knowledge of how this thing is affecting. And Mr. Speaker, even the provision of study materials, nowadays we don't have. Some of them should be introduced and taken to the school so that these children can go through them. And without that, Mr. Speaker, that is why we are seeing a lot of children dropping out because of the pregnancy, because they don't have nowhere to go. Majority of them end up on the street because some parents are not happy with them. They chase them, so they end up being in the streets. The streets, like in Nairobi, we've got a lot of children who are streets, who live in the street, which is not right because sometimes they cause crime. And this early pregnancy, if these children are not taken good care of, they'll end up doing abortion, which will cause death. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this House has a mandate to ensure that relevant policies are developed and enacted with the seriousness they deserve to protect these vulnerable girls from women eaters, so that they can realize their full potential and their creator intended to them. For example, Mr. Speaker, there is a need for a clearly defined role for school administration in
Honorable
safeguarding
Senator, what do you mean by
the
women
women
eaters?
Those are the kind those are the kind of men who take advantage of our young girls. Those one I can describe them as the women eaters, the murderers. Yes, they're children eaters. There is a need for a clearly defined role for school administration in safeguarding schoolgirls against teenage pregnancies. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kihiga Susan. Okay, you limit your timing because I can see a lot of interest.
There's lots of interest, yes. Mr. Speaker, this is a matter that is of grave concern to this country. I'm sure, like everybody else, we've all really seen we've all been seeing this on the news every day in the newspapers and are just shocked when we see these statistics. So I congratulate Senator Haniri from Vihiga County for bringing this statement. It's extremely timely. But beyond speaking about it, Mr. Speaker, I would wish to see some things come into place or get put in place where we don't see this happening. I know, for example, there is a picture that was circulating in the social media where you saw students, I think it was in Kisumu County, where they were going to the classes or to do the exams, and each of them was carrying a baby, and there was a line of about 20 or something, and it looked ridiculous. This should not be happening. And even looking at the statement, I see that we have statistics where some of, say, for example, the teachers have been found to have committed some of these vices, as it's stated here. But I'm quite surprised that the most TSC is doing is just terminating these teachers. We must get them prosecuted. Just dismissing people is not enough. Firing people is not enough. If you're a teacher and you're responsible for these children and you're impregnating them, you are worse than the devil. May I just say that? And I think, yes, and I mean that to all you women eaters. No, really. Because as a teacher, we have elevated you to a place where you're supposed to be taking care of our girls. And when you're the one impregnating them, I think actually they need to be stoned. I am somebody who believes in due process, but in this case, we should probably just castrate them. I mean, I think that might be the softest offense that we would have on these men. No right-thinking man can impregnate a 10-year-old girl unless you're crazy. You need to be about 6 feet under a jail, at a minimum. Yes, I can see you're bothered, some of my colleagues. But I think until we become very strict on these, some of these issues, as a country, we cannot move forward. How on earth can a 10-year-old child be pregnant? And we are sitting here talking about what? I think we must become the DPP, DCI. They need to get on board and really find out what's going on. Who is impregnating these girls? I don't even care that it could be their classmates. Even those need to be prosecuted. Because a girl, maybe I need to give a bit of, is it sexual education here? A young 10-year-old girl, under no circumstances can she consent to having sex. So under any circumstances or under no circumstances can this be legal. So I think we must begin from the criminal part of it and then move forward. Sex education must also, like the Senator Haniri has stated here, sex education must become really, really key in this country. We cannot continue shying away from those discussions and from talking to our kids, because clearly there is a problem. Clearly there is an issue. And until we face it head on, we cannot make any progress. And this cannot be business as usual, because it is not normal to have a 13-year-old pregnant. That's a child. I am myself a mother of girls, and I would murder whoever would dare do that to my daughter. So I feel the same way as a senator and responsible for these girls, that we must not have a community that is that way. I was also just looking at some statistics, and it shows that, like we said, Narok is at 40%. I see at least Nakuru is at 18%, which is terrible. But Narok, there is clearly something wrong, my colleague, Senator Olekina. I see Homa Bay at 33%. I mean, this is crazy. West Pokot at 29. Tana River at 28. Nyamira at 28. I mean, it's really, really out of hand. And maybe it might be worth looking into what, say, for example, Moranga, and I don't see my colleague, but what Moranga is doing, because they are at 6%. Speaker, protect me, but I think they might have a point, because clearly when you have Narok at 40% and Moranga at 6%, Nyeri at 7%, Embu at 8%, Elgeyo Marakwet at 9%. So I'm wondering, really, do we have something to learn from this side versus... Mr. Speaker, I can't even have a straight face as I finish, as I conclude. But there is a problem, and we must deal with it, and we must offer the leadership that is required at this time to make sure that we do not have pregnant schoolgirls in this country and people walking free. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Wetangula Moses.
Mr. Speaker, this matter is so critical that you've just had the distinguished senator from Nakuru declaring her intention to commit a murder. Mr. Speaker, the statistics brought by the senator for Vihiga are chilling, but they are not new. Moral decadence in our society has reached the lowest. Mr. Speaker, we went with the distinguished senator for Isiolo and Nairobi to my county, and we visited Mount Elgon. And they were shocked to learn that 3 years ago or so, when you were my governor, a teacher impregnated 11 young girls in one school. One single teacher. 11 young girls. Meaning this man was not doing anything. He was not teaching. He was simply focused on immorality in school. And Mr. Speaker, we need as a nation to start a public conversation on public morality. The other day I was addressing people in Bungoma, and some of them were teachers, and I told them, if a teacher whom we entrust our children with more time than the actual parents turn on to these children, then they are psychos. And I told them, if the attraction a teacher has to a pupil he teaches is the uniform, go and buy your wife uniform so that every time you look at her, you get attracted. It is so bad, Mr. Speaker. One of the problems, as Senator Hanira has pointed out, are the parents. In many, many counties, men who make young children pregnant end up on negotiation tables with parents, paying some nominal fines in terms of cattle, sheep, money, and the child is destroyed. Mr. Speaker, 5 years ago, I visited a clinic in my county, a postnatal clinic, and I found that out of 25 young mothers on queue for attention, only 3 were above 20. Out of 25, only 3 were above 20. The youngest was 10, a child carrying a child. And a 10-year-old child having a child means it was impregnated at the age of 9. something has gone wrong with our country. And we must do something. Mr. Speaker, child molestation carries a life sentence. I would want to see the Committee on Security and Legal to bring us statistics on how many male Kenyans are in jail for life for child molestation. There's probably none. Yet this is a daily event. This is routine. And once a child has gotten a child, Mr. Speaker, we can't pretend that they can concentrate in school and be good students. Maybe 1 or 2, 3, 4%. The rest are mothers, and the instinct of a mother is to think about the child they have, not anything else. We must do something. We want to challenge the DPP, Mr. Speaker, that the gusto and energy that is pursuing the corrupt in economic terms must be the same gusto and energy should pursue the morally corrupt. We want to see people prosecuted. We want to see people in jail. We want to see people punished, their properties confiscated, Mr. Speaker, to look after the children they have sired. Because, Mr. Speaker, we live in an age today where it is very difficult, Senator Kwamboka, to even police the TVs. We buy our children phones. On those phones, they can watch the pornography we are fighting. We do all manner of things. Parents, and many of you here, your children have TVs in their bedrooms. When you go to sleep, you don't know what they are watching. And this erodes the morality of our children. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, as I end, how do we tackle this? Njoki Ndung'u brought a bill one time to this parliament, the Sexual Offences Act, which is now law. And it was viciously resisted by male MPs. Viciously. I even asked myself, are these offenders themselves? Why are they resisting this bill? And this was a bill that was going to straighten and bring some sanity to some degree. Because the draft bill in Njoki had brought had even proposed castration of men who assault children. And Mr. Speaker, cruel as it sounds, any man who sees a woman in a 10-year-old child does not deserve to be given the opportunity to be a man. Does not deserve that opportunity. And should not be left to maraud around, jumping on mothers and daughters and children at the same time. This is something that we must fight. And fighting this house must lead to see that we go back to our basics of looking after our children, particularly the girl child. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Adandulo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Let me take this opportunity also to thank Senator Haniri for this statement. Mr. Speaker, I know Senator Olekina is not happy Narok being mentioned, but there is a flash message that has just come in saying AP officer arrested after being found in a lodging with a KCSC candidate in Kilgoris, Narok County to be arraigned in court. We should start with castration, Mr. Speaker. This is really very serious because arraigning him in court is not enough. Automatically he will get away with it. Mr. Speaker, this is a matter that is really very serious. And I think as a country we have to do something about it. Mr. Speaker, Senator Wetangula has just said the fathers who look at the uniform and get excited with those children should look at their wives in uniform and get excited. But let me say this, let those fathers make sure that their daughters wear those uniforms and admire them, or maybe look at them going with them in bed, Mr. Speaker. That is the worst they can do, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, issues of pornography in this country is too much. You can't police kids using their phones to watch pornography. But as a country, what are we doing about it? And this is a question we need to ask ourselves as leaders. I come from a community that whenever a girl gets pregnant, a kangaroo court is called, where the elders sit and decide how they can cover up the story. And in that discussion, the girl, the victim, is not in that meeting, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes they just sit and decide how that young girl will get married to an old grandfather to cover up embarrassment. Secondly, or the boy or the man who has impregnated the girl should be forced to marry. Mr. Speaker, that is immorality, that is illegal. As a country, we need to do something about it. Sometimes you will see that 5,000 Kenya shillings is paid for a girl who has been made pregnant. It's a shame and embarrassment to us. Mr. Speaker, another point I wanted to raise is the issue of Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education. I have an issue with the health. That is why I'm talking about health. Mr. Speaker, we have been given statistics. This number of kids have made pregnant in Kitui, in Isiolo, in where? Can the ministry tell us what they are doing about it apart from reporting? And this is a question we need to ask the ministry. Mr. Speaker, as a leader, we should come out and make sure that government ministries are held accountable. And secondly, we must put responsibility both on the parents and the schools where those kids get pregnant. This is a serious matter. We should not let it go. We need to actually carry out a live debate in terms of how we should intervene and make action that is holding individuals responsible in this country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Olekina, now that Narok has been mentioned so many times, defend your county.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm a sad man today. I'm sad because we, as leaders in this country, have tremendously failed. We have failed as parents, we have failed as leaders, and we should all be literally punished because of having failed. Our young girls, whom I can proudly say we're here because we are preparing to bequeath this world to them. Mr. Speaker, sir, I can proudly say that I tried my best in my early years to address this issue of teenage pregnancy, to address these issues of early childhood marriages by rescuing girls who are forcibly being married off in Narok, who are dropping out of school, and I can proudly say that I helped over 25,000 of them. I was only hoping that it will pay it forward. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm also sad that even these statistics, which the distinguished senator from Isiolo has raised an issue in terms of the Ministry of Health, are not even provided by our own government entities. Mr. Speaker, sir, these statistics have been provided by the United Nations Population Fund. And it is sad because it appears as if we have now completely given up in our roles as parents, we've given up in our roles as teachers, and even trying to see what is ailing our community, we now just rely on statistics from foreigners. I think the first thing we should be asking ourselves is what is it that we can do? We know the risk involved. Mr. Speaker, sir, just being a teenager itself is so difficult. Now add the issue of pregnancy. Add the issue of preparing to become a mother. What we are subjecting our kids by not talking to them, by not putting more money into mentoring programs, we may never be able to pay for it. Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank Senator Haniri for really making this issue live that we can talk about it, not just reading about it in the newspapers. I am sad that my good county of Narok, which I'm trying to understand what is causing all these issues, because the Maasai population is still so small. And I'm wondering what is creating all these issues. Is it the food that people are eating? You know, is it the churches that people go at night? Is it is it some people who are completely sick that they think that the only way they can increase their population is by attacking their children? Mr. Speaker, sir, the distinguished senator from Isiolo talked about parents looking at their children with those school uniforms. You know, sadly enough, there are some who are sick enough to do that. I mean, some of these kids, Mr. Speaker, sir, are even impregnated by their own parents, which is annoying. It's a fact. It's a true fact that we cannot escape from it. If you look at these statistics, okay, Narok, 40%, Homa Bay, 33%, West Pokot, 29%, Tana River, 28%, Nyamira, 28%, Samburu, 26%. Mr. Speaker, sir, we ask ourselves, I ask myself, what is common among these counties which are named here? Poverty. The gap between the rich and the poor is so wide. When we were rescuing young girls from being forcibly married off, you'd be forced by an elder who will tell you, now, my son, this man is about to pay me about 40 cows. This will change me. It will make me live a little bit longer and provide the family. What do you expect me to do? Then you are like, no, you can't. You're destroying the future of this child. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, what we ought to do here is to make sure that we try and address this problem legally so that it doesn't happen. By so doing, we come up with very tough laws that will be able to prohibit anyone from trying even to think about sleeping with a young child and send them to jail. That's number one, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir,
You need
number
to
two,
wind up so that we give others one
which
opportunity.
is important, is that we need to now talk to our colleagues in the National Assembly. When we are working on the national budget, let us create a vote for mentoring programs, Mr. Speaker, sir. Each school should be given money for mentoring. Let us mentor these children. Let us prepare them for tomorrow. Because when we come here and talk about it, unless we come up with laws, unless we mentor our children, Narok will continue being like that. And other counties will follow suit. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I support and I hope that both the health department, Mr. Speaker, sir, and maybe even the devolution can look at every county, particularly these ones which have high rates, and find a way that we can be able to come up with in-house programs that encourages both a bicultural approach to it. Because the biggest problem is that, which the distinguished senator from Isiolo has alluded to, it is cultural. Some of things, this punishment are cultural. So if we approach it from a bicultural approach, where we now say some cultures or some traditions are outdated, let's stay away from them. That is the only way we're going to have a solution. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Njeru Ndwiga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I think first we need to ask ourselves, where did the rain start beating us? Because this is very unnatural. This is very new. Most of us, as we grew up, some of these things were unheard of. That there's a girl in the village who is less than 16 years and she's pregnant. These things were unheard of. But Mr. Speaker, at the moment, this is what you hear every day. And I want to thank Senator Kaniri for, you're here, for bringing this issue to the fore. Mr. Speaker, this phenomena actually indicates and shows clearly a thing called failed parenthood. And that is where we are starting from. In fact, that we are listening to my colleagues, we are delegating responsibilities to too many people, to the police who are themselves molesters, to teachers who are themselves molesters. Mr. Speaker, we must pinpoint the responsibility where it belongs. And it belongs to the parents. The parents of this country must wake up and give guidance to our children. As we do that, because we cannot say that all children who are being molested have not been tutored or coached by their parents. We have another group of fellows, Mr. Speaker, who in the past when HIV was very prevalent, at that time fellows were, the news was that if you go sleep with a 6-year-old, then you are okay. This is madness. Mr. Speaker, we are not dealing with human beings. We are dealing with animals who walk around in trousers. Mr. Speaker, my proposal is that we should relook at...
What is your point of order, Senator Sakaja?
Mr. Speaker, I understand the kind of emotion and anger that we all have. But Mr. Speaker, I deal with the security committee as the vice chair. And of course also we all deal with education. Is Senator Ndwiga in order to say that we take this to the police who are themselves molesters, teachers who are themselves molesters? Is the blanket condemnation in order where we know that there are certain elements within the police force doing this, but not all police are molesters? Many of them, Mr. Speaker, are doing a great job for this country. In the same way, not all teachers are involved. Many of them, in fact, majority, are doing an amazing job. Will it be in order for it to remain in the record of this House that a statement of blanket condemnation on two of the most noble professions in our country has been made and gone unchallenged?
Senator Ndwiga may be out of, like you said, the emotions and the gravity of the matter, but you can clarify.
Mr. Speaker, I wish my friend listened carefully. I said, recently in the press, there was this girl, I think was in Nakuru. After doing her exam, she went to the police station and told fellows now she wants to sleep with them. Police, not to report. Not to report. Mr. Speaker, it is true. Very many of our police people are very upright persons. Very many of our teachers are very upright persons. But I also said, Mr. Speaker, that the buck starts with the parents and stops there. But I also said, some parents, it's not all parents. Some parents have properly talked to their children, but those children still end up with some of these fellows. Mr. Speaker, I think we need to relook at the law properly. And I have heard, I think it was Senator Wetangula, who said we need to look at these laws properly. Because we do not have examples in our prisons. We are not seeing fellows who have been taken to court. When a kid of 10 years, when a 10-year-old kid gets pregnant, surely society must take upon itself to find out who is it that was responsible. That's what we used to do where I come from when I was a young person. We need to find out who is responsible for this. If it is a grown-up man, Mr. Speaker, society must. The man must face the music. That fellow must be taken to court. That fellow must face the law. I think we need to look at the Joaquin Dongo report, the Sex Offences Act. Yes, we need to relook at it, Mr. Speaker, because even when that law was being introduced, things were not this bad. Now we are not dealing with human beings. We are dealing with animals. In fact, you don't know what it is. That a grown-up man, and a 10-year-old child, honestly, it's like a bottle you are holding. Yeah? Really, Mr. Speaker, you cannot explain this. That cannot be a human being. It's madness, Mr. Speaker. And if we are dealing with the societal madness, Mr. Speaker, we must cure that through registration. And I think we need to look at our laws properly. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kilonzo Mutula Jr.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, this is a crisis. When I raised this issue at the funeral last week, everybody burst out laughing. This matter, Mr. Speaker, as senators have mentioned, has got many dimensions, but the dimensions must be taken seriously. One, as a nation, we must admit, all of us, that we have failed our children. The minute we take responsibility, then, Mr. Speaker, we start dealing with the issue. Mr. Speaker, what sort of country allows such moral decadence to the level where you have lowered the threshold of sexual intercourse to 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds, and it becomes business as usual? But as Senator Ndwiga says, what responsibility have we taken? In my case, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, I have a relative who I got into life imprisonment for impregnating a standard 6 school child in my village. In the last 1 year, we have not had a case of any person looking at a schoolgirl, just looking. But I have instances, like that particular instance, I discovered the chief, the OCS, the family were negotiating, land had been sold, they had agreed to pay 200,000. I am watching brief in a case in Machakos. They are offering now to marry the child so that they can deal with the question of defilement. Police stations, my dear senators, have become shops where policemen are doing cases on rape and defilement. They determine, and the quantum is 200,000, you pay, forget about it, parents are making money out of this. Parents are equally to blame. How does a child become pregnant? First trimester, second trimester, third trimester, when the stomach is this big, and then we start making noise. Teachers, I have refused in my law firm to represent anybody who commits incest, sleeps with a child. I don't represent them, and neither does any lawyer in my firm represent such characters. When we read the statistics, Mr. Speaker, these are statistics of pregnant teenagers. Just statistics. If Narok, you're 40%, those are statistics of pregnant teenagers, not the ones who are having sex. It means there are more. It's not a laughing matter. It's a serious issue. Children of 10 years have become fair game. Shame on the men of this country. We have lowered the standards of morality. We buy sweets. We buy so many incentives. The ones in Makueni, and you're not talking about the children who have been, the boys who have been sodomized. While we talk about girls, there are boys who have been sodomized. I've gotten somebody arrested for sodomizing 9 boys in Mboni constituency. Mr. Speaker, let's take action. Let's start with ourselves. What have you done as a leader to ensure that you do not have this in your village? Any person, whether it's your relative, your brother, send them to jail. That is the only way they will learn the lessons. It's not enough, Mr. Speaker, to stand here and pontificate and make so much noise, because these things are happening in your villages. If it's 40% in Narok, 33 in Homa Bay, chances are out of the 40%, one of those people is your relative, is your cousin, long distance, something. Let's take action and come here with tangible results. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Senator Kasanga Sylvia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me add my voice to this issue. Indeed, the issue of teenage pregnancies is a national disaster. And we've had these conversations many times in different forums, mostly as women. And really, I want to thank the Senator Kaniri for bringing this statement, and I also want to thank Senator Mutula Kilonzo for bringing it up at the funeral of the father of our party leader a week or so ago. Mr. Speaker, we need men, we need our male leaders to wake up and rise up and fight this battle with us. And indeed, what Senator Mutula has said is true. We have to do something on the ground. We have to get out there onto the ground and, attack this vice with the energy and the gusto that it deserves. Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity to interact with these teenage girls in Makueni last month during the International Day of the Girl Child. And some of the issues they brought up include being lured by these men. The girls are innocently busy doing their own things, and the men are busy luring these girls into these vices. Mr. Speaker, we really do live in a very perverted society. And in fact, I'm aware, I've had on social platforms amongst the men where they share pornographic material. And in one instance, a friend shared with me that he was shocked when somebody shared pictures of his own niece who's in high school. And he quit from that group and tried to tell the men not to do it. What society are we living in? It is really, really a shame, Mr. Speaker, sir. I pray that we can have our male leaders spearheading this. As much as we women are doing it, it is not enough. The men need to rise up. They need to pick up this battle. And let's not live as if it is not also our girls who are being affected. The men here are also parents of girls. So we need to protect our children. We need to protect the future of this country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Cheriot, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was about to protest because the tradition in this House is that it is known that on matters of defending the girl child, I am the truest north. Of course, Senator Wambua will protest because he has not been here long enough to know that when it comes to defending the girl child, I do not flip, I do not change tune. Mr. Speaker, this is a very sad reality that is dawning on us as a country, that we have a very serious problem amongst us, which if we do not take time to address...
Order members. I can see a lot of excitement. Okay, proceed, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I was saying, if we do not propose better solutions as a House, perhaps by referring this matter later on when you make your communication to the Committee of Education to perhaps give us more details on how far-reaching this problem is in our schools, then you are staring at perhaps the possibility of wiping out of an entire generation getting lost in the kind of issues that you're facing today. Because if our young girls growing up realizing that 2 or 3 of their colleagues can get away with this, then very soon it will be a norm rather than the exception when these things begin to happen. It also calls on us as parents, Mr. Speaker, to try and see ways in which we protect all our children from exposure to material and the kind of things that lead them to lead this kind of life. Mr. Speaker, many parents that are here, for example, are owners and they subscribe to things like the DSTV channel for entertainment. But truth of the matter is that if you ask around this House this afternoon, how many of them know how to engage the parental control avenues of DSTV? Very few of them know. And they leave the house in the morning at a time like now when kids are home with all those channels. You do not know what they are watching. In the evening when you return, you think you are returning to very innocent children, but things that they have been watching the whole day have polarized and polluted their minds. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to call on us as a House to treat this matter with a lot more seriousness. I'd wish that the Minister for Education, the CS, being a lady, she will be at the forefront in ensuring that all the perpetrators of this vice are brought to book. I want to see her in court so that she sends out a signal that the government will go after these people. When, for example, that officer is being tried in Kilgoris, it will be important to see the CS for Education in court, because this is an issue that is threatening her docket so seriously that we wish that she gives it better attention. And therefore, because I know there are many of my colleagues who want to contribute, Mr. Speaker, I want to close it at that. But just before I close it, Mr. Speaker, I want to also conclude by saying that even us, that this issue does not end with the girl child alone, the young girls but even women who are of age, who sometimes feel harassed by men in their different places. For example, even in their workplaces. A few weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, here in Parliament, I had a meeting as a chair of staff welfare in Parliament with our staff who serve us at the catering department. And they were raising also similar complaints of sexual harassment by members of Parliament. Therefore, I want to request that let us respect girl child from whatever age, either young girls or even grown-up, respect the beauty and the sanctity of the body of a woman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, order members. We are soon going to vote, so I want to call Senator Kajwang. It's for 2 minutes, then we shall come back. So members remain in the chambers for voting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was a bit worried because in the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey that put Narok ahead at 40%, my county of Homa Bay was at 33%. And Mr. Speaker, I was worried when you allowed people with 7% incidence a priority on this debate. Mr. Speaker, I don't speak because I have experience in impregnating teenagers. In fact, if I did, I should be rotting in prison. But Mr. Speaker, the issue of prevalence must be made clear that it does not mean incidence. So when we say 33% prevalence in Homa Bay, it does not mean that 1 out of 3 of teenagers are mothers. So that then needs to be contextualized. It does not mean that 40% of people from Narok or teenagers from Narok are mothers. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to repeat what has been said, but I just want to speak about 2 things, which is that as a nation and as a parliament, we must reaffirm our position that teenage mothers, or when girls become pregnant in school, we must support their reintegration. And that is fundamental because, Mr. Speaker, there are neighboring countries that have taken positions saying that when a girl becomes pregnant, that girl should not be allowed to come back to school. Personally, as the senator for Homa Bay, I will support the reintegration, the education, and the socialization of girls who have become mothers in their teenhood. And I hope that that is also the message that Senator Khaniri is trying to convey through this motion. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, the issue of abortion cannot be discussed and cannot be legalized. We cannot be telling our girls because they have become mothers while they're in school, then they should go to marriage stops and other organizations to procure abortion. Abortion is still illegal. It is still outlawed in the Constitution, and Parliament has not passed any other legislation to allow young girls to go for abortion. Finally, Mr. Speaker, when someone is caught with scrap metal from the standard gauge railway, they are jailed for life. And the charge is that they are sabotaging the economy of the nation. And we have about 12 people who are facing life sentence in our courts of law. What could be the greatest sabotage to the economy and the future of a nation than to spoil the young girls and to impregnate them? Mr. Speaker, we need to look at the Sexual Offences Act. Senator Mutula Kilonzo says that he has already ensured someone has been jailed for life. We need to make sure that these pedophiles are jailed for life. And very finally, the Sexual Offences Act requires a registrar to maintain a register of offenders. Mr. Speaker, today, if you want to become the Speaker of the Senate of Kenya, you will be asked for your clearance from Higher Education Laws Board, Kenya Revenue Authority, Credit Reference Bureau. We must add to that you must not be listed on the register of sexual offenders. That should be a mandatory consideration for anyone who aspires for public office. And Mr. Speaker, from the conversations that we are having and what we have heard about men eaters and child eaters, if we insisted on that, probably half of this parliament will not be eligible to run again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, honorable members, for the convenience of the House, we go to order number 8 and come back. Yes. So, honorable senators, pursuant to standing order. Next order. Next order.
Order number 8, the determination of the nature of bills, procedure, Bill, Senate Bills number 30 of 2018, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to give effect to Articles 109, subsection 5, 110.3, and 114 of the Constitution to provide a procedure for the speakers of the National Assembly and the Senate to determine the nature of a bill and for connected purposes.
Okay, members, pursuant to Standing Order number 79, I rule that this matter affects counties and voting will be by delegation. I direct that the bell be rung. Next. Okay, next order.
Order number 9, the Copyright Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 33 of 2017, division at second reading.
I direct that the bell be rung for 2 minutes. Order members, order members. Order members. I now direct that the bars be drawn and the doors be locked. They log and they put their cards. And I put which is? Read a second. Ninasimama, sindio? After that. So nisimame. Copyright. Which copyright? It's a copyright. Okay, honorable members, order members, I now put the question, which is that the Copyrights Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 33 of 2017, be read a second time. Can log in. Okay, voting is on. Vote, members, voting is on. Senator Professor Ongeri, voting is on. Assisted voters, manual, analog. Okay, honorable senators, the results are as follows. The ayes 26, the noes 0, abstention 0. The ayes have it.
A bill for an act of parliament to amend the Copyright Act 2001.
Next order.
Order number 10, the County Outdoor Advertising Control Bill, Senate Bills number 19 of 2018, division at second reading.
Okay, honorable senators, there's no need of ringing the bell since we are already here. So, log in. Log in, honorable senators, since we are already here. Honorable senators, I now put the question, which is that the County Outdoor Advertising Control Bill, Senate Bill number 19 of 2018, be read a second time. Voting starts. Assisted voters. Honorable senators, the results are as follows. The ayes have 26, the noes have 0, abstention 0, the ayes have it.
A bill for an act of parliament to provide for a legal framework for the regulation of outdoor advertisement in the counties and for connected purposes.
Honorable senators, I now direct that the bars be withdrawn and the doors opened. We are going back to the statements. Senator Shiyonga.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to the statement. And I thank Senator Haniri for bringing this statement in the House. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, the pattern of the concern regarding high rate of teenage pregnancy is alarming. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to take this to the public. It is with this in concern that the public is not well concerned on how to take care the moral support of the young ones and the generation. And again, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is dangerous and trickling time bomb to our youths in this country when it comes to these teenage pregnancies. These are children who have not fully developed their reproductive parts. And men are playing about with our children. I can imagine as a mother in the country or in Kenya right now, the pain we go through when we are giving birth. And here comes a child of 10 years, whom you are not even very sure, and you are giving pregnant. How do you expect that child to feel, first of all, when she's giving birth, or when she's carrying that pregnancy? It is with this, and I want to give a warning, or I want to give a suggestion in this house on the penalty that can go along with this culprit that performed this. Mr. Speaker, sir, protect me so that I can give this. Mr. Speaker, sir, protect me.
Order, members.
Thank you, sir.
You are protected.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker,
The
sir.
man-eaters are threatening.
Yes. I want to propose one of the strongest penalties that will be applied to the men who will do this. And the penalty is to scoop those engines, those organs, those reproductive organs that are performing this, so that when they are scooped with a very nice or a fine surgeon, they cannot perform this.
Order, members. Senator Outa, what is your point of intervention?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you've had a senator bringing another dimension of scooping the organs. Mr. Speaker, is she in order to use those words in this parliamentary words in this house? And when she states that the organ need to be scooped, is it for both the children and the adults that are involved in this engagement?
Honorable Senator, maybe you may need to explain how the scooping is done and what do you mean, because otherwise it will be unparliamentary. Off record.
I'll use this. I'll use the other one. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I'll use this one, even if it's refusing to accept. Mr. Speaker, sir, when I mean scooping, this is going to be done medically. A surgeon with no consent to remove the protective parts of men who have done this act, so that men can learn. And I would wish only 5 to serve as an example. And my Senator Outa here, you know the area very well. They need to remove the whole part, so that when you are there, you heal with the reasoning that what you did is not deserved in the country of Kenya and even in our generation. Mr. Speaker, sir, even if they send these men to jail, they will still do that. And we have already had cases of what is happening in our prisons. So if they go with these instruments in the chain, they will still do it. So we feel like scooping, removing is the best solution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Naomi Wako with a Q.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of laughter in the House. I don't know whether the men are excited.
Order, members, I think the House is a bit excited about the scooping, but I think let us have some order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say thank you again for giving me this few minutes to add my voice to this. I would have felt very, very bad if I didn't contribute to this. I also want to congratulate Senator Kaniri for coming up with this statement that is touching and burning and causing a lot of emotions to each one of us. I stand to support this because I am a mother and a lady. As we know, Mr. Speaker, many of our girls are not even able to do their exams well because they are all expectant. And Mr. Speaker, we are all raising our concerns just because this season is a sensitive one, and we are doing this because our girls are missing their exams because they are pregnant, they are either pregnant or they are delivering their children. So it is unfortunate that as a nation, this is the only time that this has come to our attention. And for me as a woman, my mind takes me back to the other 2-3 quarters of the year. The first quarter, the second quarter, and the third. Because I know many girls have given birth for the last 9 months or 10 months, and nobody has raised any concern. Mr. Speaker, when a standard or a class 8 child delivers in the exam room, many of us as mothers, we wonder how that girl has gone through all that pain and how she has managed even to sit for her exams. So, Mr. Speaker, it is something that as a nation we should be concerned with, and many of our girls have fallen victims as a result of rape. Rape cases has also increased. When I was a young girl and growing up, a place like Marsabit County or these pastoralist areas, we've not been, talking of rape cases or even men, having some discussions with girls. But today it is a very common thing, and many men, instead of even talking to grown-ups and women, they go to young girls and they misuse them. So we should come up with measures, as my namesake, Senator Naomi suggested, something serious has to happen so that the men cannot even dare think of doing something. The other thing is that when the girls are exposed to the teachers, we understand that many male teachers also take advantage, and the subordinate staff in the schools, in the school compound, take advantage and they misuse our girls. So, Mr. Speaker, I know the men are surrounding you so that you don't hear what I'm saying. We request that you give your attention. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Education has to come up with some serious measures so that any man who is found guilty should be dealt with properly. And when we talk of this huge number of girls, the question I have in my mind is, where are the men who slept with these girls and caused them to go through this pain? Why are we not talking of even one single man who has, done this, and why are we not even taking any action? The other day I heard that parents of the pregnant girls should be dealt with. What role has a parent, played when the girls have been misused by men, when they are going to school, when they are in school, and when they are even in their classes? The men do anything they want with the girls, and the parents are busy looking for their school fees. So as we take action on the victims, on the girls, I think we should also take action. The girls should be forced to say the men who have caused them the pain they are going through, who have impregnated them and be dealt with properly. The other thing is the female teachers in the school compound, in the schools, I think should be protecting our girls. We should tell our ladies, the teachers, to be the mothers when we are not there, so that any man looking at any young girl with a suspicious eye should be dealt with immediately, because that can be known and can be seen easily. We can easily know that, and I know women can know if they are serious. So female teachers should be made responsible, should be requested to stand there and fill the gap when the parents are not there. Mr. Speaker, as the girls go through this, they are also infected with diseases. Others are HIV positive now. Others have been infected with other diseases, and the men don't care at all. When these girls draw their children anywhere on the street, and we continue increasing the number of street children, then it is like we are not able to control our society. Mr. Speaker, as I close, I want to request
Senator Pareno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this statement. Mr. Speaker, I must say that I felt it was really painful and really touching when on that day when it was reported in the news that Kajiado was one of the very affected counties. And Mr. Speaker, it was reported that Loitoktok and Mashuru, where I come from, my division, were the worst hit areas. And Mr. Speaker, it was reported that out of the 199, over 200 students who missed their exams in Kajiado, 75% were actually girls, because we also had young men who did not turn up to do their exams. So we had a total of about 55 girls, and about 199 and another 55 who missed these particular exams and were absent on the day of the exams. Mr. Speaker, the issue is that we must go to the root cause of this problem. Mr. Speaker, the issues of, in Kajiado, you cannot talk about dropouts without talking about the FGM issues, Mr. Speaker. They go hand in hand. If we don't handle issues that our anti-FGM campaigns well, then we are going to be affected just as much as the other counties, Mr. Speaker. We also, Mr. Speaker, have to talk about poverty. There is a report that indicates that most of the girls that are dropping out are actually from very poor families. And the index shows that the poverty index actually affects this particular aspect in society, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in around 23rd and 25th of August this year, in Bashuru sub-county, one of the sub-counties that is affected, we had a mentorship program. We also had an alternative rite of passage program, where we took children through guiding and counseling. We took children, actually we had a total of 168 girls who went through the alternative rite of passage program. We had about 48 boys who also went through that alternative rite of passage program, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and this program actually had both girls and boys. Why? Because we believe, Mr. Speaker, that the boy is also the sister's keeper. If the boys were also taught that they should not be involved, then they can also help to shape up society. So in these programs, we should not leave out the boys. We should also talk about the boy child when discussing some of these programs, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that in these alternative rite of passage programs and mentorship programs that we introduced, we actually called in role models. We called in the first ladies. We called in the ARP champions in the county to talk to these girls, Mr. Speaker. And one of the resolutions that we made is that we actually need to rescue these children. You can imagine a child giving birth to a child. You actually need to rescue that child and rescue the child that has been born. They need care, they need counseling. So some of the proposals that we made, and we are still pursuing, is to have rescue centers for these children for purposes of managing the children as well as the children that have been born by the children, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, why we did this is because the issue of early pregnancies and issues of FGM are no longer issues that can just be handled individually. They are now a community problem. They are communal in nature. And we should come up as communities to try and help with this problem, Mr. Speaker. It is also time that probably we relooked at the roles.
1 minute, Senator Judy.
At the roles that we are playing as parents, the role that the social media is playing in this. And Mr. Speaker, we need to relook at the sex education that we are giving. I keep wondering, Mr. Speaker, what happened to the education, the traditional education that we used to get from our aunties? They used to take us through a lot. They used to talk about our morals. They used to shape us as we grow up. Probably it is time we went back to our communal setups. It is time we address it right from the community setup. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that this is serious. It is painful, and it is time that we all acted to improve on this situation, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Very well. Honorable Senators, we have overshot the statement hour. I'll allow very few requests, 3 minutes each, then we move on to other items on today's order paper. Senator Iman, 3 minutes strictly. Senator Iman.
Or Imana? Which one?
Senator Iman.
Iman, okay.
Order. Order. I called Senator Iman, and I can see, oh, there are 2 Imans. Where is the other Iman? Imana Iman.
So who got
I
the
called
floor,
Senator
Mr.
Iman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You have to reset the time, please.
Proceed. You have 3 minutes from now. From now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe charity begins at home. We should not blame the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health. As parents, we are playing a big role in this. First, it used to be just abstain. You abstain from sex. Then we need to use condom. And I'm here to say, go to jail, go to hell. The statistic of Garissa, I'm so worried. The statistic of Garissa is 10%, and I believe this is wrong. It's more. And yeah, we need to review this. In our country, nearly 18% of adolescents are girls. So between age 15 and 19 are mothers. And you know when an adolescent is a mother, and she becomes a mother, and then there's an opportunities she missed for like economic, educational growth are all limited. And the stigma they carry around as well. I urge the government to have a tough penalties to come up. We need a legislative proposal that will safeguard school-going girls from these man-eaters, girl-eaters, whatever they are called. And I will call them sex pests. Yeah, an urgent need for the current Sex Offense Act, We need to review that. And, you know, if a predator, I will call them a predator, if a predator will be set an example to all men. And I think a tough life jail should be imposed to them. And I will speak for my community because there's a stigma they carry around these teenage girls when they are being impregnated. They will be told, no one will marry you, and you know, the community or the family from the girl is cursed or something. So the stigma is everything. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got a lot to say, but I'm going to save it for some other day. Thank you.
You have said enough for today. Senator Maruma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to give my word about this very important statement. Mr. Speaker, in school, children are taught knowledge, skills, and values. They're supposed to be taught the three. But because of stretched syllabus, we end up teaching knowledge and skills and overlook the part of values. And I think maybe if we look at the syllabus again, we contract it a bit, then you can get more time of teaching the values. There has also been talk about the girls who are impregnated having to be chased away from school. I dare say we should not do that, because while the girls are carrying the pregnancies, the boys do not carry the pregnancy, and so the boys need to remain in school, and the girls also need to remain in school and be taken good care of until they are delivered of the babies. Mr. Speaker, the teachers also, and most of them are the young ones, who are perpetrators of these heinous acts, should also be taught life skills. When you are in class, for example, they should be taught not to be looking at the girls, if they are weak, on their faces or on the sensitive areas. They can be taught to be looking above the head. I'm saying this, Mr. Speaker, because I have been a teacher for over 21 years. I have taught both secondary and university level. And I know there are some people who are very weak. They cannot dare look at the faces and the busts of girls without getting excitement. And so if we teach these teachers life skills, and very few, Senator Wako has said there are many, there are very few teachers, like I have taught for all those years, without admiring a girl. Number three, Mr. Speaker, the parents need to take good care of their children. Senator Pareno has talked about poverty as a factor leading to these pregnancies. For example, if you don't give your child enough pocket money, she will get pocket money from the men, from the border riders. She'll get the pocket money from the people who are selling in hotels. And I have a lot of experience in this. And some parents are also perpetrators in this. They ask their children, you are 12 years, you are 13 years, you are 15 years. Why are you asking for pocket money from me? Why can't you look for that pocket money? So I think also parents have a lot to do with these early pregnancies. And so if you don't have the money, try to talk to your children so that they understand that you can stay without having the money. But if you take good care of yourself.
The time is up. Senator Cherargei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. From the onset, I want to thank Senator Kaniri for bringing this statement. I think it is so sad in this country that instead of discussing the quality, the future of our children, we are discussing what is bringing down the success that we should have made. I know the girl child for the last decade has received a lot of attention. Even as we discuss early teenage pregnancies, which normally affect the girls, I want to call upon also, we should also look into the boy child, because the perpetrators of most of these issues are the boy child, and therefore we need to give also special attention. I know for the last decade we have concentrated on women. I think in this generation, Mr. Speaker, sir, of glorified sponsors, women eaters, Sponsorees, and many others, Mr. Speaker. It is so sad
Who are
that
those,
media...
Who are those, Senator Cherargei?
I think Judge Wagiaka was very clear that their version of slave queens...
We are not aware
Humanitas,
what the good judge said.
I think
but you are using a lot of terminology that we may not be familiar with.
These people who are, what do we call, sugar daddies or whatever, that they have been glorified. And you know, it is very unfortunate that media, and I want to call upon media that, and even the issue of use of social media, I think the fact that we glorify the issue of sex, and when you go even at 9, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, is that when you are watching news at 9, you find most of the commercials that are being run as ads by the TV stations is mostly as sexual connotation. And yet most of our children are still watching televisions at that time. We should also look into a way of restricting the use of internet and social media. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, and finally, we should also look at the use and amendments to the Sexual Offences Act. And I've had the famous introduction of maybe amending to scoop reproductive organs, although I want to say not all reproductive organs are productive. So we should be very careful even as we scoop, so that we bring amendments. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree that we need legislative and policy framework. We need also to train, finally, Mr. Speaker, to train our security agencies on how to handle some of these cases, so that our girls can still have opportunity to go back to school, so that they can realize their full potential. But let us not also forget the boy child. I know some of us are the officials of the boy child organizations in this country, so that we try and protect their interests and ensure our children are safe. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Thank you. Next is Senator for Kitui County, Senator Wambua. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, listening to contributions from my colleagues, we are all grappling with the push and pull factors. As
truly acquired land or way leaves, easements, and public rights of way means the restoration of not more than the value. I think this is mischievous because there may be circumstances where, consideration of more than the value would be well considered. But I oppose this particular definition, because if it was to be here in terms of Article 40 of the Constitution, then it should have the word not less than rather than not more than would have been the adequate phrase or words to use in this particular provision. Because the provision in Article 40 is to protect, owners of property or land getting less than the value of the land that, they may be subjected to in terms of compulsory acquisition. So to that effect, I think this interpretation clause number 2 should be looked at again. Now, of course, my colleagues have talked about the issue of removing the jurisdiction of the courts. I think that does not need repetition, because the powers of the High Court are contained in the Constitution. They arise out of the protection of fundamental rights, and where fundamental rights have been violated, no other body, including an inferior tribunal, can take away the constitutional powers of the judiciary in making a determination and making the appropriate orders as contained in the Constitution. And I think for that reason, this is the clause that takes away the jurisdiction of the courts is clause number 3 in the bill. Therefore, Madam Speaker, I'd hope that beginning with the interpretation clause 2 and clause 3 for very obvious reasons which have been dealt with by other contributors to this debate should not find the light of day in the final product that we will have in terms of this particular bill. Now, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the issue of the clauses dealing for criteria for assessing value for compulsory acquired freehold or leasehold, Madam Speaker, what I need to say about this is that people out there are really suffering because of the very, very complicated process of land acquisition, particularly compulsory land acquisition. You have communities who are affected by acts of compulsory acquisition. Those who buy land or have land for purposes of speculation, those have the time, to fight in tribunals and in courts in terms of seeking, their just reward in terms of compensation. But, Madam Speaker, if you look at clause 6 of this particular bill, it makes the process of compulsory land acquisition for purposes of the ordinary citizens of this country extremely complicated. In fact, in my view, if you look at this clause the proposed section 107A of the Land Act as would be amended, if you look at it keenly, Madam Speaker, you'll find that those who seek compensation, adequate, full and fair compensation, will have extremely difficult circumstances because, this bill in clause number 6 sets out a full multitude of issues that will not be considered or will be ignored in terms of arriving at a land value index. And the other thing that is wrong with this land value index is that there's no provision for it being updated. You may find yourself in circumstances that you're dealing with an index that is 10 years old or 20 years old. And I think for communities who are living in corridors that are now very attract acquisition by government in terms of infrastructure, in Narok, in Kajiado, in Taita Taveta, all those chunks of territory, you'll find that if these particular portions of the bill are not reworded, redrafted, and make simpler for purposes of people getting their share or the compensation, you would find that you're going to cause a lot of disruption. I know of a case like in Kajiado, Madam Speaker, where communities, at the end of the day, they had to go to the president. The matter was in court. The people were fighting, in Kajiado, in Narok, over this compulsory acquisition. Part of it was in relation to SGR. Part of it was with these power lines. And even the kind of parameters that the speaker was talking about, Speaker Kindiki was talking about, you found that those were not followed. And the World Bank, in itself as a provider of some of the funds, they said, no, we are not going to give more funds to this project because the members of the public were not adequately involved, and there were things which were done which were not right for the community. So I would ask the mover of this bill, particularly, because I think he's the one who has to pilot this bill to the conclusion, because I think I want to support it, and I support Democrat. I could make it possible for a land which is, somebody is claiming 1 million shillings. I can easily bring it down to 50,000 shillings. And that may be an ordinary man living in the village. Somebody who has obtained this land for purposes of speculation, they can fight. Some of them fight, forever. They don't lose a thing because they have acquired that land for purposes of speculation. But imagine those who acquire land from generations of communities having acquired this land. It is the only jewel they have as a family and as a community. And then they are told, the value that finally will be adopted or taken will be the one considered under Clause 6 of this Act. I can assure you, communities, instead of using this procedure, are going to ask their members of parliament to go to State House and talk to the president, like the case that I've talked about. Even the courts were not able to resolve those issues. So I think this particular Clause 1, Clause 6, in its entirety should be looked at. And I hope that, that will be done in order to make sure that communities do not suffer. The other clause I have a problem with is, in fact, it's part of that. This is now Clause 8, which again is for matters which should be taken into consideration. I'll not repeat the arguments that are made in relation to the previous clause, but I think that clause also should be looked at in terms of making it less complicated for those who seek compensation. Madam Speaker, there is also, and I've said, the alternative tools which the distinguished senator from Kericho talked about, looking for alternative modes of compensation, government bonds, alternative land, that is good enough. But I think there should be a clause or some words there to ensure that where there are delays in terms of, let's say, giving people alternative land, and where it requires movement of people or relocation, that something should also be put in that clause to make sure that where you are being offered alternative compensation, be it in equity shares, be it in government bonds, and the like, that where there are delays, the owner of the land would not suffer irreparably, and that should be addressed. Then I think my London friend, Mr. Mutula Kilonzo Jr., dealt with matters to do with the tribunal. And the only other thing I should add on the issue of the tribunal, because the tribunal, as it is not, in our system of courts, they are such that they are not composed of judicial officers who are trained. And in this tribunal, under this particular bill, the tribunal will include people who are obviously not trained as judicial officers. And for that reason, to have a provision like the one I've seen in that clause, that there can be no appeal from the decision of the tribunal on a question of fact, I think that was not well thought out. I think that under the powers of review of the High Court, fact and law are all matters which would be available for the court's consideration into whether or not the justice was rendered as far as the compulsory acquisition is concerned. But having said, dealt with those specific sections, the spirit of this law is good in the sense that the definition of land as contained in the Constitution is very different, although there's an article here, Article 60, which amongst other principles that are are supposed to guide our land policy. And the most important probably is security of land rights, that when you have a land right, that right should be protected and should be inviolable, except in circumstances in which the Constitution give a basis for interference with ownership or possession. But there was a new concept of land contained in the Constitution, Article 61, on classification of land. And it says all land in Kenya belongs to the people of Kenya collectively as a nation, as communities, and as individuals. What I want to emphasize that this concept of land belonging to Kenyans collectively as a nation was never part of the Constitution, which was repealed. And that, I think, is dealing in part with the concept of radical ownership of land in terms of the people or in terms of the state. And to this extent, I think this was dealing with the difficulties in the past for land to be acquired for use, for building infrastructure, roads, and the like. And you would see, Madam Speaker, that in neighboring jurisdictions, like in Ethiopia, in Tanzania, and in many other countries, it is much easier for governments to acquire land. It is much easier for them to acquire it at reasonable prices, if you will. And to that extent, then, infrastructure ultimately costs less in those countries as compared to Kenya. Indeed, if you look at the SGR compared to what they are doing in Tanzania, and Tanzania, the SGR, or rather the standard gauge railway that is being built, is along the same corridor with the central line in Tanzania. So the question of acquisition of land does not arise except in very unique circumstances. In Ethiopia, acquisition of land for public use is much easier and much more direct. And that has made both Ethiopia and Tanzania save a lot of money and resources in carrying out major infrastructure developments. In fact, I wonder why in Kenya we decided to build our SGR elsewhere, rather than considering building it on the original corridor, which is owned by the government by dint of the fact that Kenya Railways is a state corporation. But instead, the government decided to acquire land, and in acquiring that land, those who conceived of this project and others who were close to them managed to speculate on the route of this new infrastructure or the new line. And even in areas where that new line, SGR, was going through land owned by the Kenya Railways, you find through fraud and corruption, some of this land was passed on to individuals who were paid a lot of money. So at the end of the day, you find that in Kenya, carrying out major infrastructural development is not so easy because of the speculation in land and the high cost of land in Kenya. And I think the answer to this, first of all, is to ensure, and I think there are pieces of legislation that relate to statutory bodies, organizations, and Kenya Railways that make it illegal for some of these corporations to sell land that is public land, unless they can show that they acquired that land subsequently after they were established. But I think this rule should be extended so that any public body that is in the possession of public land, if they don't need it, then that land should go back to the government or to the public, or should become part of the public land. It should be surrendered to the government or to the counties to ensure that for now and for the future, land is going to be available. In the national land policy, there was a conception which has not found fruition in terms of policy or the law of the land, to have land banks that, the government, in anticipation of what it requires to do in the future, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or even in the next century, it should acquire and maintain land banks, which are, geared towards ensuring that, development can go on in a seamless way. That has not happened. But the answer is, and I think if one had to address the issues of land that we're addressing now, and the compensation that has been paid before and now, in terms of our national land policy, I think the National Land Commission, has not done what it was supposed to do, to look into the past and address historical land injustices, and for now, because they are not just supposed to inquire into the past, but even in the current circumstances where there has been land injustice, they're supposed to correct that. So you would find that in this country, some of the richest people in this country are those who acquired public land and maintain those pieces of land for purposes of speculation. And this is something that we just don't need a policy, but we need an assertive National Land Commission, because it is in the interest of the state that what belongs to it is not given out cheaply or is not defrauded of land that the public would want to use for purposes of the future. And a lot of property, a lot of riches in this country have emerged from public land. Those who own public land along the coast, in the Rift Valley, and even in central Kenya. And now, I'm getting a little worried about areas like Kajiado and Narok, where local communities may be, in the end, become, landless and squatters on their own land. We are trying to create a land conflict in the future because, the demographics of Kajiado looked at as it was in the past, now, and in the next 10 years, the demographics are going to change tremendously, that the original ownership of the land would be completely interfered with, and the communities there will become squatters on their own land. And that is creating, a time bomb, if you may ask me. So to that extent, I think we need to go into some of these communities and into these areas to ensure that some of these activities that are going on are stopped, not just for the sake of those communities, but for the sake of dealing with the purposes for which this bill is being brought to this Parliament and for that matter, the Senate. So that land injustice, is not just addressed, but there is stability in the market for people who require land for development, and they can be able to acquire it in a manner that can make them have proper returns. So, Madam Speaker, I think that this legislation will require some kind of overhaul. I've looked at clause 2, But considering that even the mover himself has said that the provisions that relate to the powers of the courts, and if you look at the provisions that deal with that limit the court's jurisdiction in granting relief in circumstances that normally those reliefs should be available, and looking at the limitations given to appellants who probably have not succeeded before the tribunal. If you look at all that and the provisions that deal with how actually valuations are undertaken, the index established, and how then the parameters are determined for purposes of compensation. If you look at this act in those broad spheres, then if it is passed in the current form, I think it's a very oppressive bill. I would ask the mover to address those issues at committee stage. And because it was a National Assembly bill, if I'm not wrong, that then would mean that, the bill will have a lot of challenges, because if you make those amendments, then it means that, some kind of mediation will be required. So, Madam Speaker, I will then not say that I support or oppose, because I cannot support it in the current form. But I cannot also oppose it because I think the idea is correct, and with the adequate and appropriate amendments made, it's a proper bill for consideration for this Senate. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Kajwang Moses.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's difficult to make a comment on land issues after Senator Orengo has spoken because he is the architect of the legal reforms around land that we enjoy today. However, Madam Speaker, there are two questions in my mind as I address these proposed amendments to the Lands Act, which, as Senator Mutula Kilonzo pointed out, appears to be inappropriately titled as the Land Value Index Laws Amendment Bill, because in effect what you're doing is to amend the Land Act and I think one other legislation that deals with the resettlement of persons, displacement of persons, or Land Registration Act. So, Madam Speaker, two questions that come to my mind would be, who owns the land? And there's a very interesting article, Madam Speaker, that asks the question that in Kenya, whose land is it anyway? And this article done by one eminent scholar says that Kenya's land reform has been land law reform without really looking at the key issues around distribution, key issues around injustice, and key issues about the cultural norms that were disrupted by colonialists. Madam Speaker, you do recall that before the white men came to this part of the world, we had communal tenure, and nowhere was this stronger than in pastoralist communities like the Maasai. Even in my community among the Luo, you wouldn't say that you owned land. Land was held by the community. And you would exercise something that was close to usufruct, because you'd go out and slash and clear land and put it into productive use. You would only claim land that you had put to productive use. And unlike what we have today, that you can claim thousands and thousands of acres of land where animals stay and where other things stay, and you have not done anything to add value to it. Madam Speaker, the Senator Orengo has addressed that question of who owns the land, because he has referred us to Article 61 of the Constitution that clearly states that all land in Kenya belongs to the people of Kenya collectively. And then it goes ahead and says, as a nation, communities, and individuals. And so to the question of who owns the land, I am convinced that the intention of the drafters of the Constitution, when they put in Article 61(1), was that land would be held by the state and for use and enjoyment of all Kenyans in an equal manner. Unfortunately, the implementation of that intention has not followed suit, because you still find people with thousands of acres of land. You still hear stories of land the size of Nyanza province being held by individuals, while there are those who live as squatters in squalor in various parts of this country. Obviously, there is also the question of how much land does a man need. So if you have 1,000 acres, 100 acres, how much do you need? And Madam Speaker, I like referring to Leo Tolstoy, who asked the same question, and he came to the conclusion that it is 6 feet wide and 6 feet deep. That tells you that ultimately we must make use of land, and we must place ownership of land in a fashion that benefits not just current elites and bourgeois, but benefits the future. When Kenya was intending to do the oil pipeline project, which was supposed to cut across certain parts of this country to connect to neighboring countries, it was deemed much more expensive to lay a pipeline through Kenya because of issues of land compensation and complications in land rights in Kenya as opposed to Tanzania. And I know Senator Orengo has talked about this quite significantly. Madam Speaker, going to the bill that is before us, this bill, to a great extent, tries to provide clarity in the process of compulsory acquisition of land. And Madam Speaker, one of the reasons why I have an interest in this is that I know that there will be a motion that will come up where my committee will be tabling its report on the compulsory acquisition of land in Nairobi. And I do not want to anticipate debate, but I want to stick to what is in this particular proposal. The process for compulsory acquisition is in Part 8 of the current Land Act. And this bill before us attempts to expand especially Section 107. This bill, first of all, tries to expand the definition of prompt, full, and just compensation. But, Madam Speaker, there is a huge contradiction. If you are going to look at prompt as an English word, then you would expect that prompt would mean as fast as is possible, or the fastest that is possible. But, Madam Speaker, this bill defines prompt, but gives it 1 year. I don't know whether 1 year can count as promptness in any case of commercial nature or a case of compensation. Madam Speaker, it cannot be prompt if communities and persons are deprived of their land for government purposes, and then we define prompt as saying that compensation can be rendered in a period not exceeding 1 year. That is a definition that the Lands Committee and this House should look at and reject, so that we have a time frame that is in line with our common man understanding of the word prompt. The second thing that this amendment bill tries to do is to say that where the government acquires land in a compulsory fashion, the valuation shall be based on a land value index developed jointly by the national government and the county government. Madam Speaker, this is a good idea, but it probably needs more prescription on how this is going to come about. I don't know whether there is an up-to-date land value index that has already been developed jointly by these two government levels. What I know is that the County Governments Act requires every county government to come up with a spatial plan and a 10-year land plan and usage policy, which is reviewed regularly. We have not done an audit as a Senate to find out whether counties have complied with that provision and requirement in the County Governments Act. And I know for sure many counties that still do not have these spatial plans. Madam Speaker, when it comes to issues of land use and issues of properties and rates in our counties, there is what we call the valuation roll, which counties use to identify all rateable properties within their jurisdiction. When we sit in the Public Accounts Committee and we are challenging governors on rates or on-source revenue coming from rates, we realize that there is no single county government that has updated its valuation roll. As a result, they're using outdated valuation rolls which limit their revenue potential on property rates. Madam Speaker, it would then be important that in this bill we prescribe the manner in which the county governments and national government shall engage to come up with this land value index. To what extent should that land value index be updated, and in what form and manner that land value index should be maintained. Madam Speaker, this bill also establishes a tribunal, and my colleagues have expressed their concerns about their tribunal. Where I hold a different view from one of the speakers who have gone ahead of me, Senator Cheriot, is that in a tribunal you cannot aspire to represent all the stakeholders. This is a tribunal, this is not a committee. So it is very difficult to say that we need to have county governments represented in that tribunal. But I believe that is a matter for further discussion. The Land Act already has provisions for the Land and Environment Court that is properly established in this republic to be seized of matters to do with land. And so this tribunal would just be one step between the complainants and the Land and Environment Court and the various stages in the judicial process. Madam Speaker, this bill also attempts to address what happens when there are improvements on land. One interesting thing which this bill has not talked about is, what if the improvements on land have been undertaken by government? Would they then be valued, and would the owner of that land be compensated for improvements that he did not contribute on? I say this because I know there are many institutions, public institutions, that have been built on land that has been donated by members of the community. And sometimes members of the community turn around and say that this land is mine, even though there's a public project on it. We have seen with the CDF, or the National Government Constituency Development Fund, members of the National Assembly and CDF boards, they implement projects on land when the title to that land has not been sorted out. So you have a publicly funded project on private land. You've got a water project funded by the public on private land. Just yesterday, we were discussing with Nyamira County on the report of the Auditor General, and there were audit queries. Nyamira County has sunk boreholes and put up water projects on land that is private, and they've signed an agreement on paper somewhere there saying that the owner of the land shall receive water for free. What if the owner of the land decides that that is not proper value for allowing the water project to be in there? And so if the government came in to acquire the land in a compulsory manner, will the government pay for the improvement that itself it had done? I believe that is something, because the bill attempts to bring that clarity, it needs to be expanded further. Again, Madam Speaker, this bill attempts to address the issue of compensation of persons who do not own land but have stayed on that land for a period exceeding 12 years, what we call adverse possession. It has been a challenge that you've been sitting on a piece of land, you don't have any piece of paper to show for the ownership, but you've been there for 12 years. And then the government comes to acquire that land. You should be compensated, and that has been taken care of in this bill. Madam Speaker, the procedure on compulsory acquisition has been abused, not because of lack of legislation, but simply because we have decided we do not want to follow the law. If you look at Section 107 of the Land Act, as it is right now, the procedure is so clear. It states that, number one, compulsory acquisition must be initiated by a cabinet secretary or a CEC. The National Lands Commission cannot initiate a process of compulsory acquisition. It must be a cabinet secretary, and it must be a CEC. In fact, the National Lands Commission does not have the money. The money for compulsory acquisition comes from the acquiring authority. And that's why sometimes it's very difficult to say that NLC has spent this number of billions in compulsory acquisition, because NLC's budget is largely an administrative and operational budget. The money for acquisition comes from the acquiring bodies. And once the initiation is done, there has to be a notice of intention to acquire that is gazetted. Then there have to be inquiries. There has to be a notice of inquiry that is gazetted, and then there has to be a survey and award and transfer and surrender. With such clear provisions, Madam Speaker, today you will hear it reported that Integrity House, is it called Integrity House, the one that houses the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, was acquired in a compulsory manner by the National Lands Commission at a cost of 1.5 billion. But it is reported that the owners remain unknown. The procedure for compulsory acquisition cannot put you in a situation where you buy land where the ownership is unknown. Because when you do the inquiries, or when you do the notice of intention to acquire, you are required to call all persons who have an interest in that land. This process of compulsory acquisition cannot happen in an opaque manner if we decide to follow the law. Madam Speaker, in my county right now, we have an airstrip that requires to be expanded. The airstrip in Homa Bay measures about 1,100 meters. But with 1,100 meters, it cannot handle large aircraft that can carry our fish and send direct to New York. It can only handle the 13-seater aircraft. And in a conversation with the CEO of one of the airlines that are flying to Homa Bay, he tells me that all we need to do is to expand the runway by an additional 500 meters. That will allow cargo planes to land. That will allow bigger planes to land with tourists who can then go and visit Ruma National Park and all the other beautiful blessings that God has given us in Homa Bay County. But the challenge to that 500-meter expansion is twofold. Number one, a budget from the Kenya Airports Authority has not been forthcoming. But secondly, and most important to this debate, is that the communities living around the airport have demanded that they must be compensated for the land, because that was ancestral land. They settled there. They've buried their loved ones in that area. When Kenya Airports Authority comes, it makes an offer that is at best ridiculous, because when they come to Homa Bay, they are offering 100,000 shillings per acre, whereas in other parts of the country, they are offering close to 1 million shillings per acre. The people of Homa Bay are demanding that there has to be some equity, there has to be some fairness in consideration and in compensation. And that has stalled the expansion of an airport that has got huge potential, that has got a huge effect, can have a huge effect on the economy of that area if it was to be opened up. And so, Madam Speaker, when we say that we are going to use a land value index, that will make it consistent, that will make it predictable, that will allow the communities living around the airstrip in Homa Bay to know that if they are to give up their 1 acre, they should be compensated an amount that is fair as compared to those people who are being compensated on the standard gauge railway. It is for that reason that I support the intention of this bill. There are other issues that have been raised that could then be corrected as we continue with this bill, and how I wish that we could also see the report of the Lands Committee having considered this bill, so that they can tell us through their expert review what is it that they believe needs to be changed out of this bill. Madam Speaker, as I finalize, I just want to pose the question, why did we establish the National Lands Commission? And one of the commissions that has enjoyed great public confidence and support at its formation was the National Lands Commission. And Madam Speaker, even the appointment of the first chair of the National Lands Commission, it took a lot of political stamina to ensure that Dr. Swazuri was named the first chair of the NLC. And Swazuri, when he went into office, the people who have done shoddy things around land in this country feared that he was going to flush them out. People felt that finally we found a man who was going to implement the Ndungu report. That finally we found a man who would implement the TJRC report whether Parliament has adopted it or not. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, what we have is far from that expectation. I do not want to enter judgment on the conduct of Dr. Mohamed Swazuri, because there are issues in court. But when an institution finds itself in a situation where the chairman is in court, the CEO is suspended, and there is infighting, there's factionalism, and you have to go back to your office through a court order, it means that you have fallen short of the expectation of persons, of people in this country. Madam Speaker, I will be considering making certain adjustments and additions to this bill to address this particular question. The role of NLC in managing land resources in counties. A court of law recently ruled that counties cannot grant or dispose of land without involving the NLC. But it was silent on whether counties must involve the NLC in acquiring land. We have seen in the Public Accounts Committee, almost every county is acquiring land here and there for establishment of stadia, for establishment of markets, for establishment of stages. In many of these cases, the land is grossly inflated. But the counties do it, and they follow their own procurement laws. If the NLC is not involved at the point of acquisition, then it becomes a bit cumbersome for the NLC to be involved only at the point of disposal. And I do hope that as we continue through the committee, we can put in some provision, because this then will go into an amendment of the Lands Act that will provide clarity on how and where the NLC comes in when a county wants to buy land. If the NLC was to stick to its objectives and to be faithful to its mandate, I would have no problem saying that for every county that wants to buy land, the NLC must be involved. For custody of those records, there has to be some cross-reference to NLC and the land registry. For disposal and grants of land, the NLC must also be involved. Because our job as Senate is to find out ways in which we can help counties, ways in which we can strengthen counties in their role. Finally, Madam Speaker, in providing my support to this bill, as a country we must be radical. And Senator Orengo was speaking very softly, but was saying very radical things. When he was referring us to Article 61 of the Constitution, that says that all land in Kenya belongs to the people of Kenya, I could clearly see Senator Orengo is trying to remind us that this business of individual ownership of land, hoarding of land, is against the principle of the Constitution. The land needs to go back to the people of Kenya. The land needs to go back to the communities of Kenya. We need to take this land from private hands so that we can allow the state to do proper planning. We are not talking collectivism or ujamaa that failed in Tanzania, but we are talking of a much more pragmatic land tenure system that allows the state to carry out development and that takes away this limited resource from the hands of the few and redistributes it to everyone. Because at the end of the day, the much land that a man needs is 6 feet wide and 6 feet deep. Madam Speaker, with those many remarks, I beg to support.
Senator Olekina Ledamo.
Madam Speaker, I thank you for giving me an opportunity to comment on this very, very important bill, which I hope and I wish that a majority of Kenyans are keen to listen to what this bill is about to do. Madam Speaker, I've not had a long time to look at all the amendments which are being proposed, but I've been able to skim through. And from the onset, I have to, first of all, I think, correct my dear brother, Chair of PAC, in referring to Article 61 of the Constitution. I think the Constitution is very clear that all land in Kenya belongs to the people of Kenya collectively, as a nation, as communities, and as individuals. So I don't think there's anything wrong with a particular individual owning a lot of land. I think the process of acquiring that particular land is what we ought to be discussing here. Madam Speaker, I've looked at this bill and the proposed amendments, and some of them worry me quite a lot, because it appears to me as if the intention is good, but just a way to get to making sure that the issue of land is dealt with accordingly is the one which is questionable. Madam Speaker, if you set up a tribunal, I have no problem with it. But the problem that I have that this bill is trying to do is trying to clip powers from the land court. It's when you are trying to essentially say that in the event that I default, we have a lot of people in this country, Madam Speaker, who have got land, who have not paid rents. And you try because of the economic challenges. Sometimes it is very difficult for you to be able to even pay for your fuel. And you probably have quite a lot of land that was bequeathed to you by your grandfather or your forefathers, and now all of a sudden, you cannot be able to pay the rates. This bill is proposing that, Article 4, that despite subsection 4, if the land is required for a public purpose, the court may not grant relief against forfeiture, even if the grantor makes good the default. Madam Speaker, how many people default in paying their loans? How many people make good of that? So if you take away now the powers of the court to be able to give people relief, then where are we going? Madam Speaker, I think it is important that when we compulsorily acquire land for the good of the public, we first of all consider the rights of the owner of that land. I think Article 40 is very clear of the Constitution that everybody has a right to own property. And every person has a right, either individually or in association with others, to acquire and own property. So, Madam Speaker, if I acquire land and I own that land, what this bill is saying is that that value of that land should remain stagnant. That in 2 years' time, if, for instance, the government now want to acquire that land to be able to develop something huge that will incidentally increase the value of that land, that should not be considered. Madam Speaker, I don't think Kenyans are listening. And I think this is the high time that I remind Kenyans that it is imperative that you read the text. When the Committee of Lands was holding public hearing on these amendments, those halls should have been flooded by Kenyans reading the text. Because if you don't, then tomorrow you'll be holding demonstrations which will not help you. Madam Speaker, the Constitution is very clear that when the government intends to acquire land, compulsory land acquisition, compensation should be done immediately. Where do you expect people to go and live? If you say, we are giving you we'll do so within 12 months, within a reasonable time of the taking of the possession of the land by the commission. A written undertaking indicating the appointment dates not being more than 1 year from the date of the undertaking when compensation is to be made. Madam Speaker, that is wrong. I think if you want to acquire my piece of land, for you to be able now to make it public, to put up a road, then compensate me promptly. I think the move of this bill, and this is why I say, Kenyans, read the text and contribute. Help us understand your needs. Because we could be here and we rush. Earlier on today, Madam Speaker, I was going through YouTube and I was listening to the majority leader in the National Assembly. And he was castigating the Senate for delaying bills. Madam Speaker, I want to correct the leader that we are not delaying the bills. We are reading the text. We want to understand what are these changes that you want to bring in that will affect the future generation. Madam Speaker, about 3 weeks ago, a gentleman from Narok called me and told me that his house is being demolished for SGR. And he has been told the land will be acquired forcefully. He'll be given 1 million shillings to go and look for somewhere else. Madam Speaker, that gentleman has been working. He used to work in Serena, Sarova Hotel. He worked in the Mara. He worked in Narok. And you build a house worth 20 million shillings. And now you come and tell him that we will compensate you within 12 months? Where do you expect him to go and live? He has raised his kids to live a certain way, to expect certain things which he should rightfully provide for those kids. But all of a sudden, their life has changed. I think, Madam Speaker, we really need to be thinking about future generations. Any law that we draft, any law that we amend, we must do so knowing that everything we are doing in this world, we are bequeathing to the future generation. So we should really not only take care of our own immediate interest. Madam Speaker, I have no problem with development. I love development. But let us develop informing the public why it is important to acquire the land. I'm concerned about the delays, Madam Speaker. I sit in the Energy Committee. And in most cases, this country is losing a lot of money, particularly on the Turkana wind project, because of issues of compensation. Today I spoke to a young lady who also raised concern that she has been told that they will be compensated. But every time, Madam Speaker, that the value or the valuation of that land is done, it is so funny that the value never goes up. It keeps going down and down and down. Who is going to protect? Who is going to protect that landowner? The people in Kajiado and Narok are still waiting to be compensated for the SGR which is passing there. The people in Turkana have cost us, the entire public, to lose over R1 billion shillings a month because of the Ketrako line, I think line 5, which is not completed. But where do we bring the balance? We can only bring the balance if we consult widely, if we engage the people, show them the need as to why we must compulsorily acquire their land, but also promptly and immediately, Madam Speaker, pay them for their land. Madam Speaker, one of the things that worries me in this bill is that if you look at Article 6, that says the mover should consider increasing the penalty. This 500,000 shillings or 3 months in prison, or both, is actually very, I mean, it's very, what do you call it? It is very limiting. It's not really, it is very lenient. That's the word, thank you. Because if I buy land, or if someone gives me info and tells me, by the way, tomorrow there's a new city which is being built by the government, I rush there and I buy land, and then the next day the government is coming in, and now they want to buy my piece of land, and I make over R1 billion shillings, what is 500,000? I think that penalty ought to be increased so that it makes it difficult for people to take advantage of communities like the Maasai. Madam Speaker, there are so many people who bought land along the road to Suswa from Kimuka. There are those who bought land in Dukamoja, going all the way following the SGR. Today, Madam Speaker, in Suswa town, where most lands there don't even have titles, maybe a piece of 1 acre used to be about 70,000 shillings maximum. Now, even with 5 million, you cannot get a plot just because SGR has come in. And because some people leaked out information, a lot of people came from neighboring counties, they bought a lot of land, they are the ones who are now to be compensated by SGR. So that provision, Madam Speaker, is something that the mover should consider really increasing the penalty. Madam Speaker, one of the key issues that I note, which ought really to be changed, is that the powers which are being given to this tribunal, which has been set up. Madam Speaker, I believe in the separation of powers. The court, Parliament, and also, Madam Speaker, the executive. Now, when you take powers that have been given by the Constitution to the courts, and you give them to a tribunal. And when you look at, Madam Speaker, the composition of that tribunal, it says that the members of the tribunal shall consist of one person appointed among 3 persons nominated by the Judiciary Service Commission, who shall serve as the chairperson, 2 persons appointed from among 5 persons nominated by Valuers Registration Board, 1 person appointed from among 3 persons nominated by Surveyors Registration Board, and 1 person appointed from among 2 persons nominated by the Attorney General. You're bringing in people here who do not have a lot of legal background to be able to protect innocent Kenyans. A young Maasai woman who the husband died, who has not even gone through the succession process to be able to have the instrument of ownership of the piece of land. And you take away the powers of a court to hear the matter in regards to any dispute relating to that land, and you give it to a tribunal where you've put in valuers, you put in people who are interested in commercial activities rather than the rights of those individuals. It is completely in violations of our human rights. So, Madam Speaker, I think the mover needs to consider giving the tribunal certain powers, but the original jurisdictions must always fall within the courts. The courts currently have original and appellant jurisdictions to hear and determine all disputes relating to public, private, and community land and contracts. If you take this power away, Madam Speaker, I thought I still had more time. No, I still have more time, Madam Speaker. I think I got in for a short time. Madam Speaker, I hope we are not in the move, and I hope I'll beg the mover to defer the reply to another date, because it is important for Kenyans to really... This is a bill, Madam Speaker, that we should not rush.
Honorable Senator, you have up to 6:29, so you have just about 4 minutes. Not 4. You have 3 minutes to conclude.
Madam Speaker, you took one of my minutes. I think one of the key things that I hope that when we get such bills that affect land, Madam Speaker, land is very emotive. And now, I'm worried that we might be trying to rush through this bill and not give people enough time to really interrogate. Because my contribution to this bill would actually recommend that the mover of this bill sit down with a majority over the, maybe even Nakamkunji, to go through clause by clause, just to ensure that we don't do something today which will cause more pain. There are so many Maasais out there, Madam Speaker, who do not have title deeds in their land. They do not have the title deeds. They don't have the title deeds because they are either in a group ranch, or maybe because they didn't know the process of getting that title deed. This bill now is sort of like considering them all as squatters and saying that they will be considered as people who have lived in the area for an undisrupted period of 12 years. If that section is there, Madam Speaker, it has got to be very clear. Because from what I read here, Madam Speaker, the issue of freehold and in terms of valuation, land in Narok now, Madam Speaker, is more expensive than it used to be. But there are parts of Narok where the people who live there do not even understand, they don't even know the value of that land. There are parts of Narok County and Kajiado County where these speculators come, they buy the land, and tomorrow they buy it for 40,000 shillings. In fact, yesterday, Madam Speaker, I'm not a violent person, but I actually nearly punched somebody when he came and told me, I want to buy you a car so that I can go and exchange with 20 acres of land in Masailand. Because now we are so gullible. We are, in our cultures where we value things which don't have any meaning. And it's because we do not have that knowledge. So, Madam Speaker, I think for this bill to support the communities and not to create more poor people in this country, I think it's important that we, Madam Speaker, I still don't have, no more time for me, please.
Your time is up, please. There are no other requests. I therefore call upon the mover to respond. But looking at the time, I will extend the sitting by 2 minutes to allow you to make your reply.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, first of all, I want to thank all the senators for great contributions. On the issue of there is already a concession from the mover, which is myself, on the question of the delimitation of the courts insofar as the 3 sections are concerned, and whether or not you can legislate to say no one should go to court. That's not possible. We must delete those sections. Number 2 is to just inform the House that establishment of tribunals is for the reasons of making delivery of justice simple and timely and expeditious. And most of the tribunals across the country are composed of persons who are non-lawyers, although headed by a lawyer. And all the tribunals also are managed from the judiciary. They are not managed from the executive. The reason being that they were all moved to the judiciary for purposes of expeditious dispensation of justice, but also for proper management. And just to inform the House also that formation of a tribunal does not take away the constitutional duties of the courts. It makes it easier for the courts, because then after the tribunal has made decisions that they make, one can now go to court. And in most cases, tribunals help to dispense justice expeditiously because composed of experts that are otherwise not found in court, that would have actually been brought to court as expert witnesses. Now they will be sitting as tribunal members. The other thing I want to inform the House is that members should read the whole sections of the amendments. And by the way, this is not a new bill, just amendments to the existing Land Act. And members must read various sections, which applies to leasehold, the ones that apply to freehold, the ones that apply to community land, the ones to apply to what is called traditional land held by communities like where I come from. And also now, where I heard the Senator of Narok talking about cases of squatters, which is appearing to the question of adverse possession. With those so many remarks, Madam Speaker, I beg to move to reply and request the Speaker, as per Standing Order 61, Madam Speaker 61.3, to postpone the putting of the question to another date. Thank you.
Honorable Senators, this matter being a matter that affects counties is therefore going to proceed for division probably on Tuesday, noting that tomorrow is a day for motions. Honorable Senators, it is now 6:32 p.m., time to adjourn the business of the House. The Senate therefore stands adjourned to Thursday, 15th November 2018 at 2:30 p.m.